were really invested in me, folks were really invested in me. They were like, you a little mini missionary. The church mothers would teach me like how to, because I was a tomboy, but they would like, teach me to be a little lady and stuff. And sometimes when I look back at it, I say the church mothers taught me how to organize first for white Jesus. I remember I had some little translator, pocket translator, and I'd be out on the street with them, passing out tracts and doing all the things and just talking to people. But it's also doing the praise dance and being engaged in, in the world of the church. I think is also where I got familiar with how to connect to people spiritually and how to be vulnerable in a spiritual realm with people that I think has also deeply impacted who I am today.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. Last February, I sat on a panel at the Queer South History Conference, which convened in Charlotte, North Carolina. The conference was organized by Invisible Histories, an organization that does a lot of work around LGBTQ history in the South. And it really was an incredible opportunity to talk about the Zami Nobla podcast, the work we do, the origins of this work, and how I see this as a collection of oral herstories in some form or fashion. After being a part of the conference, I really began to revisit my love for the work I do here and capturing oral herstories and sharing these incredible stories. Today, my conversation with Mary Hooks is a deepening extension of my commitment to capturing the oral herstories of Black lesbians and Black queer women, and making sure that we are here and that there is a receipt of our existence. And that's what I talked about in North Carolina, podcasting and these oral herstories as being a receipt of our existence as Black lesbians and Black queer women here on this planet. My conversation with Mary Hooks, like I said, is just an extension of that work. It was so incredible talking with her about her life, her work, her passion, and all the wonderful things she has done and wishes to do in the world. For those of you who don't know her, she is a community organizer based here in Atlanta, Georgia, and continues to be a source of social justice activism, commitment to culture and community. I hope you enjoy this conversation and just know what a gift it is for us to be able to hear these stories of the women who share their stories with us, as well as to collect them for future listeners who want to understand how we planted our feet firmly on this terra firma in the 21st century. And now my conversation with one whose hands are firmly placed on the plow of justice.
My name is Mary Hooks. I'm 42 years old, and I show up in the world as a sister, a daughter, a Black queer feminist, abolitionist, pan-Africanist, a wife, a friend, a jokester, and someone who deeply loves Black people.
Well, Mary Hooks, we deeply love you, and we're so glad that you are part of our Zami Nobla podcast today. This has been a long time coming. We certainly have just appreciate all the hard work you've been doing here in Atlanta and really across the region, and all the amazing activism that's a part of who you are. I want to first start out by talking a little bit about your childhood, some formative experiences, and where you grew up.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Racine, Wisconsin. My people migrated from New Albany, Mississippi on my mother's side and Tuskegee, Alabama on my father's side. Um, and I didn't grow up with my parents. My mother gave my great aunt Anne $100 to babysit me and my two older sisters for a week. And she didn't come back to claim us for about 9.5 years. And so I grew up with my great aunt, who I often say is my biggest teacher, my greatest teacher. And she recently passed. So just want to call her name and send an ashe to her. And I remember her telling me and my sisters that, one day your mama gonna come back and get you, but she's never going to be in a position to be a mother. And so part of what she saw as her assignment was to ensure we had what we needed to be able to take care of ourselves. And so I have early memories of being small, small little girls taking the household laundry around the corner to the laundromat. Could barely put the clothes in the washing machine. We were so short. But I could say with confidence, by the time we left her home, we could run a home by ourselves. And she also was super, like, really serious about education, which I believe most Black people, given the way in which education was violently stripped from us, asserted that education was the way to uh, get out of poverty, right? She was working class, um, working class Black woman in the 80s into the 90s. And I remember she showed me and my sisters that she would get 400 something dollars a month on welfare to take care of us and the two children that she did have. And she, you know, made sure that anytime I had a friend down the street, my little friend Sherelle would come. She's like, y'all need to spend some time writing your name and practicing your penmanship, and just really, was serious about us getting our education. She would say, if everybody in that classroom can learn, you can learn,
Mm.
and she would, try to impress upon us. Now, I think you can be a lawyer. I think you could be a doctor. And those were kind of the two things she would be driving, instilling in us. Neither one of my sisters or I took up that mantle of becoming a doctor or anything like that. But she taught us some foundational thing that literally saved our lives. So I think being raised with my great aunt, I think was a game changer for me and my sisters, because else we would have found ourselves in, foster care at an early age. And ultimately, me and one of my sisters did find ourselves in foster care. Um, but I think we had the grounding that we needed to be decent human beings by the time we left her home. And then I think for certainly what it meant to move in with my mother and my stepfather at the time. And it was a very interesting way in which it happened, because it wasn't like a plan or, anything like that. It was the day before Thanksgiving, I think circa 1992 or three. And a man knocks on our door, and my aunt was asleep. And, she trained us, don't you open that door for nobody if I ain't home or if I'm asleep, right? And so I remember us communicating with him through the door, and he's saying, "This is Boyd. This is your stepfather. We coming to get y'all tomorrow, and I'm gonna try to come back later." And we were like, "Okay." And so when we relayed the message to her, we began to pack our things up in garbage bags. The next morning, I believe that night, he came and got us again. His family didn't live too far away. And they just picked us up, and we spent the holiday there, ate spaghetti that had sugar in it the first time, and just like, what is happening? And then the next morning, we like went and got our bags of stuff and drove down to uh, El Paso, Texas, where he was stationed. He was in the military. And that was the first time that me and my sisters were in a whole different place. But then it was also, we were like, it's November. but it's not snowing, and the weather was hot. Like we were just like, what? Where are we in the world? But I think the hard part was that I remember us weeping the whole was an 18-20 hour drive, because of just the way in which we had to say goodbye to the only person we knew. As I think she would probably be be upset if we said only mother we knew, because she was clear, like, that's not who I am to y'all. But the person who provided us with safety, security, protection, consistency, and home. And we stayed there shortly, like only for a few months. When we moved back to Racine, Wisconsin, we'd learned that both of them were in their addiction, and what it meant to come from a place, a household where, my aunt didn't play with none of that sort of stuff. We had a very routine life. And then to be like exposed to the world in some very harmful ways, I think, shifted our lives. It shifted our lives. And and my sisters and I got separated. And there was a moment when I was in sixth grade, and I moved again with my mother and my stepfather. My sisters had been put out, and I was starting sixth grade, middle of the year, at a new middle school in Madison, Wisconsin. And I remember thinking to myself, what am I going to do? I don't have my sisters with me. Like, what am I going to do? And then I remember making a decision in my mind. I remember this clear as day. I said, well, I'm going to just be bad. I'm going to just be bad. Ain't nobody going to mess with me if I just be bad. And so I set out on a journey to just be as ratchet as I could, and to, set up a wall of protection around myself. And that got myself into many of fights, and me, experiencing with drugs and alcohol at an earlier age, and sex at an early age, and all the things. And I think I spent the next 3 to 4 years being a wild little teenager. Okay. While also still staying committed to my schoolwork. I went to school now, okay? And I also knew that if I went to school, I'd get a decent meal, and I wouldn't, have to be around sort of the things that were happening in my home life. Um, and so my middle school years were deeply transformative in a lot of ways, uh, good, bad, and different. And I think the last one I'll have to name was, by the time I got into the ninth grade, one night I went to this gospel play called The Rapture at St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church. And I wasn't going to see the play, I was going to see this little dude. And I think it's also important for me to name that around sixth grade was the first time I had like a twinkle of an eye for a girl. And this was when I was still in Madison, and I told one of our little homies, I was like, I think I like her. And her immediate response was, ew, that's nasty. And I kind of like joked it off and never said anything again. And so here I am, ninth grade, supposed to be hooking up with this other little young dude from my school. And got super captured by the play. It was one of those like fire and brimstone, God coming back, get your life and, house in order sort of things. And by the time it was over, I had found myself at the altar. And when I opened my eyes, there were a lot of people. I remember walking up to the altar to give our life to the Lord. When it was all said and done, everyone had left, and I was still there weeping, right? And maybe a few days later, I was living with my aunt and uncle at the time, who both were struggling with their addiction, more functional, but we lived a very hard life because of it. Um, and I remember sitting outside smoking a blunt, a personal, and I was thinking to myself, I'm gonna give this church thing a try. I think if I try it, it might help save my life. I won't end up pregnant or going to jail, and perhaps it might change, some of the unhealthy behaviors that I'm seeing in my family. And I committed my young 14-year-old life to the Lord. I joined Greater Grace Temple Church of God in Christ. And I remember thinking as I were meeting other young people that they not serious. Okay, they some church babies. They don't want this salvation thing for real. Okay, y'all still want to listen to worldly music. You know what I mean? I had begun to just wear my skirts long and had the transformation was happening over my life. And I had gotten my um, my prayer life together, my fasting life together. I would hang out with the older women of the church, and I joined the praise dance team, and the woman who ran it, Melinda Eaton, eventually became my foster mother by the time I got, I think, in 10th grade, because my I could no longer live in my household the way, you know, the way, yeah, it was really difficult. Um, and it was there that I began to see a different side of the world. Like we would go to like the Church of God in Christ conventions and stuff. And remember we like would fundraise, sell calendars, sell all kind of things. And we'd go over to California or Michigan and different places. It's the first time I got on a airplane and just begin to see a different and smell a different air, Um, and folks were really invested in me, folks were really invested in me. They were like, you a little mini missionary. The church mothers would teach me like how to, because I was a tomboy, but they would like, teach me to be a little lady and stuff. And I was involved in a lot of school programs and, started working as early as I could. I knew I needed to be able to take care of myself. That's always something that was, instilled in me and was super critical. And so, yeah, I feel like those three, like turning points deeply shifted who I became and who, the person that I've become. Uh, and I would also, and sometimes when I look back at it, I say the church mothers taught me how to organize first for white Jesus. I remember I had some little translator, pocket translator, and I'd be out on the street with them, passing out tracts and doing all the things and just talking to people. But it's also doing the praise dance and being engaged in, you know, in the world of the church, I think is also where I got familiar with how to connect to people spiritually and how to be vulnerable in a spiritual realm with people that I think has also deeply impacted who I am today.
Thank you. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I'm curious, when you left El Paso, when you went back to Wisconsin, even though you were staying with your aunt and uncle and then foster care, was your great aunt a part of your life in any way at that time? She seemed to have been so formative in your earlier years.
Yeah, I think I remember like walking over to her house, the same house we left from, and I think it felt like it was a very short visit. I think that what we had eventually learned was that she it broke her heart when we left, and my aunt was not one who doled out affection. It wasn't like she was like, I love you, and she was not that person to us, and so it was. Excuse me, trying to make sure my batteries, my phone, my thing not charging. She didn't move like that, and so if I remember it feeling kind of distant, like oh she's moved on with her life. When she took us in, she was 33. And when I think about that now, I'm like, oh, she was young, and made such a sacrifice. And eventually, I'd see her at different family members' houses and things like that. I think I remember maybe one time spending the night at her house again, and then eventually over, I'd say, before her passing, maybe the last 10 years or so of her life, she pretty much was like, didn't want to have anything to do with anybody and pretty much lived very reclusive, and not in contact with many
Hmm.
people. And so I'd write her letters, I'd come to her house and leave just envelopes of pictures, and her son, um, she passed away last month, he would say, she kept up with your life. She kept up with y'all girls from what she could see over the internet. Like she kept up with y'all. She knew what good work you were doing, and assured me that she kept up. But her presence in my life was, yeah, very far and few between. And I felt like, even as me and my sisters was going through a lot, like it felt unfair in a lot of ways to go back and find home in her, given that, she had sacrificed so much.
Mm-hmm. Was there any inkling as to why she became so withdrawn from family? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think my spidey sense is I remember some years ago, maybe one of those times I stayed a night with her, but I think she began to have be kind of bogged down or uh, a lot of despair around what was happening in the world. And I don't think that because she lived very isolated, that she had the language or community to help understand what was happening. And so I know like she, uh, have like conspiracy theory, have like, some of it like laced in religious, precautions and prophecies and things of that nature. And so I think that certainly played a role in it. Um, yeah,
I'm
I
always,
think, and she also,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say she also lost her husband eventually after we'd left. She'd gotten married. Uh, and I think for a short span of time, she got a chance to she moved out of Racine. She was living with her husband. And I've understood they had a beautiful life. And he died. I believe, unexpectedly. And so I think she just suffered with a broken heart, and a lot of grief.
I'm always amazed how the environment in which we live provides opportunities for us to choose how we're going to withdraw or turn to a place of moving forward in a world in a loving way. And looking at what you've just shared about your aunt's life and in your own life, you made the choice to move into the world in this loving, compassionate way. What were some of the early steps that brought you into community organizing and understanding that you had something to give in the world? I know you talked about the church and passing out tracts as a way of really helping you gather some skills for that. But what are some other ways in which you began the process of truly walking into the work of community organizing?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And, in hindsight, I think what the first thing for me, once, when I came out as a lesbian of my freshman year of college, the church went wild. It went wild. And my godmother, who was my foster mother, I call her my godmother, uh, we had a very, very hard rupture of our relationship because of it. And in hindsight, I'm like, that was almost kind of volatile, getting put out, the calls of, rage, you owe God, God saved your life, and, being accused of witchcraft. And, I was literally on the brink of deciding to take my own life. It was a very, very difficult time. And what I remember, like this quote I read, it is better to be hated for who you are than to be loved for someone who you are not. I remember thinking to myself, I need to figure out who I am in relationship to the world. Like I knew and understood my life to be in service to Christ as a Christian, as somebody who was going to eventually engage in ministry and, in all these dynamic ways. And so I remember, and I went to a Lutheran school, right? A private Lutheran school because I got a full ride scholarship, a Coca-Cola first generation scholarship. And that was the only school I applied to because one of the folks in the church said, hey, if you apply to this school, you put my name on the application, you don't have to pay the application fee. And I was like, great, cool. end up getting accepted, getting a scholarship, what have you. And, by the time I got into sophomore year, my life was literally crumbling. Uh, I also began to, other things was happening in the world that I think I just had a different ear to hear and to see and bear witness to what was happening. So when 9/11 happened, I remember that day as clear as day. And the woman who I'd fallen in love with my ninth grade year, we had sworn each other off. We were like, I'm like, I'm gonna try to give my life together, give it to the Lord. And 9/11 happened and we came out of our class and we were like, what is happening? And she was like, let's go to my room, turn on the news and actually, see it. I remember us going to her room, this gut feeling like, oh, I know I shouldn't be here. I promised I wouldn't go to her room. This is, but we went and we watched. And I remember us making a decision and we were like, there was this little thing we used to say. It was a Robert Frost poem where he talks about leaving Earth for a while, uh, that she introduced me to. And I think we said something like, let's go leave Earth for a while. We went and did what we lovingly did. And, 9/11 happening, I remember not only was my world and life collapsing, but also, everything began to shift. Young homies from Chicago mostly who had came on scholarship were being, sent to Iraq to look for weapons of mass destruction. And we were like, this is ridiculous. And then I remember, the stirrings around the vote in Florida and who stole it. And I didn't have all the analysis, but I knew something wasn't right. And I would say, uh, there was about uh, there was a class that I'd taken, I believe, and I did some deep research around the war on drugs. And um, and I started like doing a lot of research around the war on drugs. There it is. There was another memory attached to it. Elaine Brown, who headed up the Black Panther Party, came to my school. I went to Carthage College
Okay.
in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And she came to my school. Of course, I didn't know her. And I remember the lecture that she gave. She had just written the book, New Age Racism in America, The Condemnation of Little B. And she began to talk about Little B's life, the main focal point of her book, and the ways in which the systems uh, betrayed him and what it did to his life. And she also zoomed out and talked about how the war on drugs and Reagan and the Contra scandal and all of these things. And I remember thinking to myself, so there's a reason why these things was happening in my family. And because I just grew up thinking that my family made bad decisions, folks just love smoking crack, you know what I mean? And she began to, her lecture gave me more context and it sent me down like a what was in the world was happening. And so those seeds of information that I was getting, including the moment I found the book, Zammy, A New Spelling of My Name, in our library at this Lutheran church. And I remember checking it out and was like, I'm not giving this book back. And that began, and then I went down like this huge rabbit hole of finding like lesbian writers and like, what does it mean to be a lesbian? And there was this one book, Does Your Mama Know? And it had all these short stories of Black women who had come out and like their relationships with their moms. And so I was learning like who I was as a lesbian, as someone who loved Black women, and also getting more context for the life and the chapters I had already lived. And so, by the time 9/11 happened, then Katrina happened. I remember I wanted to go. I just started like my first job out of college. And my manager, like, you can't go, you in this training program. And I was remember thinking, I never want to have this feeling of needing to go, to move and not be able to. I can't be bound by this. And um, while also like just really immersing myself in as much queer culture, mostly social life that I could find. Every small gay bar, every time somebody was like, there's a party, I'm like, I want to go where the gays were, And so those two things were happening at one time. And by the time we get to 2007, I had found myself working at a gas station, seeing the ways in which the workers weren't being treated right, people weren't getting paid right. I was in a relationship with someone new who also was in the closet and had committed to coming out, but did not. And we had lived together at that point. And I said, you know what? I lost a lot and struggled too much to be able to come into my queerness and what it meant for me to be out. And I could not afford to go back in. I said, this job, I have done everything that I could to, try to, for the right thing, do the right thing to make sure people get treated right. There were limitations. And so I gave everything a 2-week notice, told my sister was like, come to Atlanta. And I said, say less. In 2 weeks, I had given away most of my things, kept my books and some other sacred items and drove myself to Atlanta. And that's where everything changed for me.
I want to go back to 9/11 when you talked about leaving the world for a bit with your friend. And you made reference to this being the same young woman you were attracted to in ninth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it funny how life circles around?
Yeah, I mean, my freshman year of college. So my ninth grade freshman year of college, and then, we didn't like reveal it until like the literally the last days or so of our freshman year. So that whole summer
Wow.
into sophomore year was this pull, pull and push and pull of, me trying to, yeah, get back in good graces with my walk with the Lord and also struggle with my love for her.
How has your sexual identity, I'll use the word colored and flavored. I'm not for sure if that's the right word I want to use, but how has it shaped the way in which you move in the world as a community organizer?
Hmm. Well, when I really got that invitation to understand what organizing, what movement was, I was at a party, one Black, Black Pride weekend, and I was with some buddies. I started building community here in Atlanta. We went out to a bar, and my buddy, also named Angela, was like, "Hey, go talk to that woman over there at the bar." And I want to, I'm like being a wingman. And when I asked her what she did, what do you do? She was like, "I'm trying to stop the shackling of Black women while giving birth in prison." Ooh, I said, "What, sis? You doing what? That's happening? You doing something about it?" And we all eventually became friends. And I was so curious. Like, what does that actually mean? I took the bus down to Gina Six when, Al Sharpton said, get on the bus and from Chicago and, I'm like, but I don't think that's what you're talking about. And she said, I think you're serious because you keep asking me. I'm going to introduce you to my political home, which is Southerners on New Ground. And this is where you and I first meet, was when Song was doing, I forget what they were calling it. The program was a 6-month program.
The mentor circle?
And yes,
Yeah. Yep.
yes. Oh, yeah, I forgot that language.
Yes.
And, I think coming into um, my first political, like for real political, like teaching, learning sort of space that was my very first time. Uh, and I think because it was being facilitated through a queer lens, not just the folks, us who were queer, but also the politic being super queer. Um, and at the time, I don't believe the language of Black queer feminisms was being used, but intersectionality and learning about Cumby and learning about how previous movements, particularly queer movements, LGBTQ movements, had deep impacts around, the way in which, um, you know, progress had been advanced, being able to understand what was the difference between, queerness as a political identity and like, I was finna cuss, but queerness that says, we're not about the status quo. And then that's the queerness of what it means to be in loving relationships, same gender loving relationships. And then learning about the movements, that undergirded that, learning about Stonewall, learning about ACT UP, and all of those things. And song, for folks who listen to this and may not be familiar, Southerners on New Ground being a Southern regional LGBTQ organizing political home, that was clear that its role was to move those who worked on issues of race and economic justice more left around issues of race and gender, while also trying to move those who worked on typically mainstream LGBTQ issues more left around racial and economic justice. And so I've always understood that to be able to move in a movement, organizing spaces, what it meant for as a Black lesbian person to be, not just out, right? Song didn't even require that we be out, but what it would mean for people who perhaps is working inside of the NAACP, who might not be able to name themselves, to be able to not only bring my experience and our frameworks, et cetera, but also what it meant to kind of do like a nod to the folk in the room, like, I see you, you might can't be out, but I see you. Um, and for queer people to take up the legacy of the civil rights, human rights struggle that has been waged in the South. That was like embedded in me.
Give us just a brief overview of the community organizing work you've done. I know, like you said, I met you through song, but you've done a lot since then. And give folks just a snapshot of your life and work as a community organizer.
Yeah. So I think when I eventually my first assignment, and I ain't gonna do like all the assignments, but the first one I think is important, is when Paulina asked me, Paulina Helm Hernandez, she was like, "We got something for you to do, baby." And she asked me to do a listening circle, a listening tour in Alabama. That's when Song was trying to build more base in Alabama. She gave me 4 names on a piece of paper, and she's like, start there, call them. 2 of them had already moved out of the region. And so that was pivotal for me, especially as someone who, I remember thinking, I am so confused. I do not know what I'm being asked. And I remember asking Paulina, like, why are you asking me to do this? She said, because you got good instinct. And I was like, well, if I'm supposed to go look for queer people and talk to them about what they loving, what they're willing to fight for, I know where to find us. And so that first assignment doing that, I went as down uh, as south as Mobile and Dothan, to as north as Tuskegee, Tuscaloosa, talking to all manner of people. And that's where I begin to feel like the marbles begin to come out of my mouth. And I begin to be more fluent in the language and understanding of what the organization was, what we were up to, and really, and started doing a lot of immigration organizing work there. And then that work also began to move in Atlanta as the copycat bills from Arizona came and the anti-immigration bills. And we began to stand up more organizing here in Georgia. And it was in through that front of struggle that I began to learn more about nonviolent direct action and engage in doing direct action and the direct confrontation of power. And then Song was also eventually like begin to do more like regional campaign coordination support. As Song was building out chapters, so doing organizing schools and strategy sessions with different chapters, and really learning what it meant to convene people, how to set an agenda. And at that time, I was under the mentorship of Kaila Mumbabaro, former Black Panther, one of the founders of Critical Resistance. And she was literally just blowing my mind. She would have me come up to Durham and like sit here and let me just pour into you. And then begin to do a lot of work with fast forward, was doing some work with the Southern Movement Assembly, really thinking about how to build a Southern political platform that included the issues that queer people cared about. Fast forward, the Zimmerman verdict drops, and when after he murdered Trayvon Martin. And I remember we were grappling with if we were going to do political work inside of public education. And we're like, nah, that ain't going to work because we not in school. We don't have kids that's in school. And um, when that happened, I remember it felt like everything in the atmosphere changed around how we did the work and the context in which we were doing it. Before it's like trying to get folks to do this, come to this town hall, come to this thing. People are like, okay. But once that happened, it just seemed like there was this massive opening and people were thirsty, right? And so I went to Ferguson, they put the call out. I remember folks saying, you go back home, you notice this happening. We had been in a research here in Atlanta around what issue we wanted to take up, fines and fees. And then we found ourselves doing court watch and we were like, wait a minute, this issue around bail, this is this is the point of where we need to disrupt this thing. And that was maybe around 2016, like the end of 2016. I remember clearly Spirit saying, now, what about if y'all bailed out Black mothers? You know, because we had been taking arrests, folks had taken arrests, doing all sort of things, right? Especially after August 9th, after Mike Brown was murdered and and called me to attention around, how do we highlight the crisis of what this means for folks who survived the police encounter and have to engage the slow death of the courts, and what it means to have to sit in jail, and what happens when the state interrupts your life, and how it destabilizes families, villages, our community, et cetera. And so spent, from like 2017 to well into 2020, doing a lot of work around bailing out Black mothers, but also doing a lot of political education, standing up national infrastructure, and playing my part. There's many of us who participated in that work. So the Black Mamas Day bailout as a tactic became something that was happening nationally, even some international stuff. Began to get my feet wet with some international work in South Africa. And, became a Atlantic Fellow, was recruited to be a fellow in this program, and really got a chance to build with folks who were looking at land and climate stuff and underground economies, all matter of work, which deepened how I understood what is it going to take to bring about a liberatory world. And and also was helping to stand up the ecosystem of the movement for Black lives, and was doing a lot of troubleshooting mostly when it came to a lot of the uprisings, and being able to move resources, move bodies, help folks develop campaign strategies, help put out fires with some of the BLM chapters. And currently, once I transitioned out of song at the end of 2020, and Fabrielle said, hey, y'all, we really need to build infrastructure in order to advance this 5-year strategy we had developed. And so joined the staff there and, really helping to strengthen what it meant to be a member of this Black-led over 100 organizations trying to move a collective strategy together. So that meant a lot of training, a lot of technical support, helping to create systems whereby people can engage in democratic ways and help share, resources with one another. And yeah, so currently, like a lot of the work that I'm so grateful, so grateful that I get to do. My role inside of Infrabill has shifted. And so technically, I'm the co-director of the Innovation Lab with a very clear assignment in this moment to be getting a pulse for movement around what is the alchemy of strong mass-based organizations. Like, how do we keep people in? How do we keep people dedicated? How do we move, folks into some shared values in politics? And then I'm also running a program called Our Safety Ourselves with hyper local project here with some Black women that mostly live around the corner at this apartment complex around the corner from me, with the aim to do the consciousness political education while also um, determining what is a alternative to policing that we can engage. You know, a big part of our fight when we were running the defund campaigns, all the things, this fight around Cop City, people like, well, who we gonna call? Police the only thing we got. And we're like, friends, we have to build and dismantle. And so getting to do some of that build work through that program and actually looking at Guchacha circles, that indigenous practice that came out of that they used in Rwanda, and really used it post the Rwandan genocide, and really thinking about how can we use indigenous practices of of seeking justice without the courts, the police. Um, and I'm in the as I'm still a fellow with the Atlantic Fellows, and currently in the process of designing a convening for Black women across the diaspora that'll take place in Cape Town in April. And I mean, I'm like, I ain't gonna run down my work plan, but those are some of the few things that I'm up to these days.
You know, I guess because I knew you initially through song and all the incredible work you did there. It was interesting for me to learn that you were leaving and moving on to something else. When you have had such an important role and done such great work in the organization, how is it to leave that and move on? What kind of brought you to that place of understanding, okay, now it's time for me to move on and do something different?
What a question. When I initially took on the role, I had set off top, I'll do this for 5 years. I'll do it for 5 years. I think I'd already been on staff inside of the organization for at least 3 at the time, and had become a member, right around the mentorship circle stuff. So I'd been in the org for some time. And I think I don't know where I came with the conclusion, but I was like, I just don't want to be that a person at the helm of an organization for so long, because so much was changing. I could see it, you know, as these different every uprising, there would be a new slew of folk, coming into the organization. Many who were younger, folks coming in, with a different type of experiences, folks who were coming in through the academia, and I was like, the leadership as organization must change with the ways in which our basis and our membership is changing. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, I'm in my 30s, getting into my late 30s. I'm like, okay, I may not be, hip enough, but it was always clear to me that I was not going to stay no longer than 5 years in that role. And I think that there was also a point, 2020 was like my last full year of moving work, and we had begun to experience some hardship internally that I was trying to resolve for, and working with the staff and members to resolve for it, but we struggled hardcore, and I think that um, there was a difference of opinion on how we move forward. And to me, I've seen the hard times come inside of song. And I was like, the thing that helped us to remind ourselves of what time it was on the world's clock and what we needed to be doing was to collectively take action together. Like friends, put their hands on the plow. And I think at some point we got really navel gazing around trying to deal with some of the internal stuff. And I was like, friends, COVID is happening. We're calling to get folks released from jail. This is, prime election year. Like all these things were happening, right? And I think that if I'm shut up, people will always be like, Mary, you move too fast, you're pace, you're trying to do the most. And so I think that in some ways folks was like, we tired of you. They weren't saying that explicitly. I'm joking. But in some ways I felt like I don't know if to be able to get out of the hard moment that song was in, if my leadership and the ways in which I showed up to the work was actually going to be the what was needed. And I was I was like, I can hold that, I can hold that. And so when it was time to transition, I knew that it was the right time. And I knew that what it meant to be a forever song member, as we call ourselves, and what it meant to not just being a part of the organization didn't mean just, being a member, or it didn't mean just moving chapter-based work, or it didn't mean just holding position on staff or board. It also meant to move the politic out into, again, those who work mostly on racial and economic justice, and so I still very much understand my role as a member of Song in what I'm doing now, you know?
I guess in some ways, when you put your, as they would say, put your hands on the plow and do the work of social justice, even if you're not working in the field you've been plowing for a number of years, you're going to be working in another field. I mean, there's just something always about understanding the need of being involved in movement work, because there's always going to be a need for it. Yeah, our world is always in need of those
Yeah.
who can make a contribution to that. You've done
Yeah.
so much. You do so much. You are married. You're a mother. You're a movement worker. How do you juggle or balance all of that? And what does self-care look like in the midst of that?
Yeah, I'm like, if my wife hear me answer this question, she might be like, But,
We won't tell her. We won't tell her.
okay, okay. What I aspire to do, I try to listen to myself. And sometimes, I'm very stubborn. I'm a stubborn Capricorn, but I try to listen to myself. And sometimes it helps at her nudge when she's like, I see you, you need rest. And I've learned over the years not to feel guilty about it. Like the other day, I slept in and I was like, I know I needed this, and I learned the hustle. I'm sleeping in tomorrow, and I've learned not to feel guilty about it. Um, and I think that, uh, and I get this question a lot because people are like, you've been around for some time, Hooks, okay? How do you stay in it? And I think, and as maybe as naive as it sounds or whatever, like I just deeply believe in what we can do. Part of it is just like, um, like the same way when I learned about white Jesus and I could be saved and da da, da, and I went to the mat. I'm like, I'm going to the mat because I believe in this thing, And so a lot of it I get fueled and fueled by the work, the type of projects I'm involved in, the sort of folks I'm able to engage with, the experiences that I get to be a part of, help create, bear witness to. Like it fuels me in a lot of ways. And then, for the times when it don't always feel like that and stuff, I think that, I have a beautiful village surrounding me, like, amazing wife. My kids are epic, cute little baby, and so that's like good medicine right in the household. And then, I have Paris. Paris was the woman who I met at the bar, Paris Hatcher. Um, and my friend Angela, like, there's a crew of us. We've been friends for years now, and we make our way to each other to, like, have the conversations about what it means to be getting older. And now some of us got kids and married, so just being able to have folks in my life who, my sisters, you know what I'm saying, but just folks in my life who I have a depth of time with that keeps me, you know, my sisters keep me humble for sure. And that ain't hard, but they really make sure, we know you Mary Hook's been in Essence, all of that, but and so, but it also just, grounds me in a particular way because I know they've seen me over some time. And so it helps me to like stay grounded in who I am and whose I am. And, like, little popcorn on the stove, those are little treats, like sipping E&J on my front porch, talking to my neighbors, being able to, you know, get, I'm a nerd. I study. So when I'm like, that 3 a.m. shift when everybody's asleep, I'm like, ooh, I get to read, I get to nerd out, I get to watch a documentary. And the one thing that's also, and I can't believe it hadn't come up already, um, is singing. Freedom singing has been, a balm in Gilead. And, it's was part of organizational culture of song and Southern movement. And I also is working with another comrade to hopefully build out a movement mass choir. So I just get to, it's
Mm.
just a lot of good deliciousness, but singing also is good medicine for me as well.
I was going to ask you that question. That was on the list I sent you because there is a real history of art and music and protest. And some would say, I know that Esai Barnwell of Dr. Barnwell of Sweet Honey in the Rock has said that there's one of the things she laments is there's no protest music. You know, we don't have a lot of that now as we had in the
Mhm.
past that carry us forward. And it seems to really beg the question of what are our songs now? How can we infuse that back into the movement so that people can be sustained by it as you have been in your
Mhm.
life? Are you seeing any ways that people are kind of turning and shifting music into movement now?
Yeah, for sure. I think one clear example that stands out to me is this was a few years ago, BYP 100, organization of young Black people 18 to 35, put out an album of freedom songs and chants. Some that were like remixes of the old stuff, some of the new stuff, on a different beat, that sort of thing. Uh, and I think that, I'm like, I don't be writing songs like that. I wish I had that gift. That's not my jam, but I'm like, you give me something to sing, I'll sing it. And then there's others like Monica Ray Simpson who has offered some different songs. And so I think that it is a need and a desire. Like people want it. Anytime I sing freedom songs, people are like, write it down, record it, something. I need to learn the songs, even the songs of old, which I do feel like people, hold as sacred, you know what I mean? Like foundational, The one time I got the side eye because I didn't start the meeting with woke up with my mind stayed on freedom. People like, what do you think you singing? You better sing that song. So the oldies are still very much goodies. And I think that given the extent in which we need cultural transformation, that it's become more and more important. And I was in Brazil the other week, and folks were literally talking about our cultural tools, our songs, all the things like as so critical to how we transform not just the conditions, but also the hearts and minds of people. And so that's why I'm super excited about working on this building up this movement mass choir because, part of the hope is that we infuse more artists who, may not see themselves having a clear role inside of movement when in fact they have not just a clear role, but we like need them, we need them. And so hopefully we'll be able to satisfy some of those gaps.
Are we going to hear that project come to fruition this year, or what's the timeline for that? Do you all have that planned out yet?
Yeah, we have our first interest meeting March 24th from 3 to 6 p.m. And we have a flyer that we're going to start circulating probably within the next day or two that'll start circulating so folks who are interested can sign up and join us.
And it's going to be based here in Atlanta.
Yeah, we're going to start in Atlanta. We've had some
Nice,
conversations on how to build it out, some regional mass choirs and how folks can build it out locally, create a
nice.
toolkit so folks can stand it up, and then identify where are the times nationally where we're like, all right, all the mass choir must assemble to DC or the DNC, who knows?
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
I love that. Oh, that sounds wonderful. I can't wait to hear that, hear more about that, and to
Mm,
hear what comes out of that. Um,
yeah.
I have a couple of questions before we end. The first one really is a look back, and for you to imagine with me our sitting in the room with a younger Mary Hucks in her teens, late teens, early 20s, and knowing what you know now about the world and yourself. What would you say to that younger Mary?
Mm, mm. I'd probably say um, I'd probably say, ooh, like you're gonna overcome your fear. Like I grew up really, especially my younger years, like deeply. I don't know if it was afraid, but I felt like I carried a burden, like I could feel the weight of the world, and I think it showed up as fear, but I think it may have been, in hindsight, it was like grief, you know. Um, and I would just wail when like the Michael Jackson "Man in the Mirror" song would come on. You know, I was just as a kid, I was, you know, folks were like, "What's up with this kid?" But I think I would tell myself like, you're going to be able to learn how to overcome your fear, um, and which was going to require you to be more bold. And you do have it in you, kiddo. You got it in you. Uh, and I'd probably tell myself like, I had to give myself some advice to, as I got told later on, don't sign nothing with nobody in your 20s. Don't you sign no car note. Don't you buy no nothing with nobody in your 20s. Okay. While you are out here exploring love and relationship and heartbreak, don't you do that, girl. Save yourself some heartache. Um,
Oh.
and I think the last thing I tell myself uh, is is to make more space, intentionally make more space for uh, for your family and for your friends in your village.
Mm.
Like, be more intentional about that. Usually, I'm the one being organized into like, Mary, come on and do brunch. Mary, come on and like we finna do this thing, and they literally have to come snatch me off of the front line uh, to do things. Um, so that as you know as I'm growing and learning that you know those who have that depth of time with me are also being being a part of that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The second part of the question is looking forward at your life and just the work that you want to do in the future and how you're thinking about aging. You mentioned looking and talking to your friends like Angela and Paris and being honest about what aging is like in your 40s and as it's different from being your 30s and your 20s. But looking forward, who is the type of Mary Hooks you want to show up in as you envision yourself an older woman in your 50s and 60s? What's the future woman that you want to see in this world? Who is she like?
Hmm. Me and my wife kind of have a joke. We're like, okay, when we get older, we doing all of the radical direct action. We're like, arrest us. This is what we do, you know? And I think I'd also be uh, um, less restrained in the ways in which I speak the truth, and not in a way that's like harmful and, you know, um, but where I'm not enough. I've grown, and I find myself, it's starting already, where I've grown out of second guessing myself, second guessing my opinion, second guessing, you know, and just give my grounded assessment and read and truth from the way I see it, and not feel like um, I'm overstepping or I'm not qualified enough, you know, to say the thing. When in fact, I'm like, I can't say the thing. Um, and I hope to be, you know, like I hope to that I do what I can now with my children so that as I age, like my children want to be around me, you know, and like I've fostered healthy relationships with them where they're still intrigued and want to like come cuddle and want to like I want that, you know, I want that. I need that. And I think I also want to I want to I want my lifestyle to be different. You know, Charlene and I talk about like if we ever had to live in a different state, we want to move to Mississippi and we want to like get a little piece of land and work on it. I just want things to be slower. I want to not like wake up to the calendar invite and what I have to do and, you know, less scheduled life and more just like getting in where I fit in and showing up unannounced, that sort of thing. I'm like, I want that ease. I want that ease, So that's what I'm hoping for. While also still deeply engaged in political work. I don't know if those two things can exist, but I always say I have at least, I'm 40 something. I think I got at least a good 20 more years in me to do this work in the way in which I'm doing it.
I feel like we could talk forever. There's so much more that we can't say, but time is limiting. You're a very busy woman, and we're just so grateful to have this opportunity to be in conversation with you. Is there anything we've left out, a question I should have asked, something you want our listeners to know about you?
I think it is important, especially given the political times we're in. Like we're in a time where people, you know, uh, good, bad, or indifferent are, there's this thing around celebrity culture and movement, and sometimes people, respond to me in particular ways that make me deeply uncomfortable, like, oh my God, Mary Hooks, that weird stuff. And I'm always like, I understand where it comes from, but I'm like, it's not because I'm like some celebrity. I've just been around a lot, you know what I mean? And I know people and people, and but it's not celebrity. And I try to make that distinction and what it means to know a person versus like, you know, celebrating somebody from afar. I don't know how to quite describe it, but I'm when it's all said and done and I'm like, I'm still that same Mary Hooks, grew up in Racine with barely enough to live on. I'm still the same Mary Hooks that love to party, drink too much E&J and smoke too many cigarettes. The same one, who like deeply enjoys what it means to be Black and conscious and just want to do right by our people. You know what I mean? I'm like, and I ain't no superhuman. I ain't, perfect by no means. You know what I mean? I'm ridiculous at points, And so I just, I never want people to see me in that celebrity light. Like, I'm just Hooks, just trying to do my part. And those that I get an opportunity to meet with and build with, like, that I get to sit on my porch with and like do story circles with or whatever it is that we do, like, them the people who know me. Them the folks who, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like regardless of whatever happens out there, you know me. And what that also means then is you can correct me, you can call me and say, what you mean when you say it XYZ, like that's sort of like who my people are and what that means to be in right relationship with my people. All that other stuff is just, all that other stuff.
It has been an honor and a pleasure being in conversation with you. Mary Hooks, thank you for being part of our Black lesbian history.
Thank you so much for having me. What a treat.
I know the one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. I know the one thing we did right was the day we decided to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. Hold on. That's more than a song. That really is a mantra of showing up in the world and understanding how important it is to do movement work. And that can be defined in so many different ways. My joy of talking with Mary Hooks was just a reminder of what it means to be a true believer and one who has a robust hope for the world, for social justice, for human compassion, and who will continue to hold on to that hope and that desire and that belief that things can be better. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Mary, and I look forward to the movement mass choir that she's forming and hearing music from our movements and finding ways that we can rest in the care of art and the life-affirming gifts of community and culture and creations that are rooted in love and hope and faith and a belief of what is better. If this interview served you well, I want you to share it with someone. Send them a link so they can be inspired just as much as we were. And leave a rating and a review wherever you listen to the podcast. As I've said before, it means a lot. And if you want to send some feedback to me personally, feel free to email me at AngelaDeniseDavis@ZammyNobla.org. We have so many more incredible episodes that are in queue, and I can't wait to share them all with you. You know I appreciate your listening to the podcast and you're showing up as someone who values the life and work of Black lesbians, Black queer women. Thank you. Thank you for that. And in the meantime, be well, stay well, and have a sweet one. Sweet.